good to be with you this morning. As we begin, I actually want to start today by reading a word of scripture, and we pray together, and then I'll do introductions and talk you through where we're going today. But today we are looking at the book of Matthew, chapter 22. And starting in verse 34, God's word says this: Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Would you pray with me? Father God, we are grateful that you've called us to this place, into this room and into this gathering. And we are grateful for the neighborhoods you've called us to do ministry in. And so God, we pray that in this time together, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts will be pleasing to you, God, as you call us to serve those who you put us in community with. God, as we head from this place, bless our actions and our words and help us show your love to others. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hi, good morning. So my name is Anthony Prince. I am a family pastor out on the West Coast. So I live in Glendora, California, which is just outside of Los Angeles, kind of Pasadena area. And I saw we have a few people from that area with us today. So hello, neighbors. For the rest of you, a lot of what I talk through today, though our church has experienced it in Southern California, and I've also experienced some of what I've done up in Northern California, I'll try to, as much as possible, speak to not just what can be done nationally in the United States to partner with other community organizations, but I'll try to also speak outside of my context as much as I can. I have a tendency to leave space at the end for questions. And so if there's questions you have right now coming in about things you hope we cover, sometimes it's helpful to write them down now. And at the end, when I say, hey, and do you have any questions, you're going to look back, see if I answered it, and if not, you don't have to think of something on the spot. You kind of already have that prompted. So you can absolutely do that right now. I am, like I said, a pastor. I'm also a dad. I have 3 kids, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 9-month-old. Some of you might look at me and go, I thought he was like 12. Nope, I've been using oil of Olay for a lot of years. So very useful. Today, specifically, we are talking through gospel-centered community partnerships. It would be silly for us to get running, though, without talking through a couple of these words. And the first one I feel like that we should address is this idea of something being gospel-centered. And so, I actually trust that your brains are smarter than mine. So I want to hear from you what comes to mind when you hear gospel-centered. Rather than just raise your hand and tell me, this is a good chance for some of us to get to know each other a little bit. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask you to get into groups of 2 or 3. They can be in your row, in front or behind you. And just kind of share what comes to mind when you hear gospel-centered, that something is gospel-centered. And then, if you hear something great from someone around you, I'm going to ask you to share that for the room. So not to share your own great idea, but something you hear someone else say. So I'm going to give you about 2.5 minutes. So it's got to be quick-ish. When you hear gospel-centered, what do you think of? Go. Good. I'm glad you followed that well. I appreciate you. So I want to hear what you heard, not the brilliant thing that you feel like you said, but those things that around the room you heard when those near you heard the phrase gospel-centered. So is there someone who wants to offer up and embarrass someone around them who said something brilliant? Yes, David.
Sue said Jesus activities. And immediately in my mind, it gave me a picture of, doing things, but always having Jesus on the brain.
Yeah, gospel-centered requires action.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely. Good. What else? Sue set it up now, right?
The young lady was saying the fact that it is based on what Christ taught and what he actually lived, the example. And that's what it would be, what we should look like if we're involved in the same.
Absolutely. Gospel has a whole lot to do with Jesus, right? Absolutely. His words and his actions. Absolutely. What else?
Anything that we do is to be building relationships or toward building relationships in which and through which we can show the love of Christ.
Absolutely. Building relationships. Absolutely. The gospel is a relationship, right? Absolutely. It's not just actions for the sake of actions. Good. Yes, Becky.
This gentleman right here said it's meeting people where they are.
Meeting people where they are. Yeah. That's good. I haven't heard from every group. Connie, what did you hear?
How can you help them where they are?
Yeah, it's not about me. Right? Good. Front row over here.
It was Jesus.
Good. And I hope that as we walk away from this space later today, you're in a room with people who care about this. And the conference isn't over yet. And you're going to have times to share meals. You're going to have chances to sit in large group settings. It would be neat to sit together with gospel-centered in mind, with community in mind, and ask each other as you sit there and as you share meals, what this looks like as it plays out in your own communities. Because again, we have shared interest in this room, which is neat. I think when we talk about gospel-centered, it's important to think about what it is. It's also important to think about what it's not. Gospel-centered is not your church-centered. Right? The gospel is bigger than your church. I have a phrase I like saying, that Jesus is bigger than my building. And then as I work together with other churches, I also like to say that it's the same Jesus, different buildings, right? And so gospel-centered means it's not about my church. It also means it's not about me. Right? It is really about me. I like that we named that. I knew you guys were smart. You know, people. This is good. Now, community partnerships. I'm curious. In a room like this, I would imagine there are already some community partnerships that exist. Some things that you're already doing as a church body in your community. And I don't want to give you 20 minutes to share those. But is there anyone who wants to talk about, just real quick, something your church is already doing to partner with your community?
I just recently moved to a community, and I participated in Easter. They make meals for those who don't have families or can't get out of their apartments, and we go deliver them. They do it for Easter and Christmas.
Great. So around Easter and Christmas, kind of holiday seasons, when people would typically be with family, your church brings meals to people who, and you bring the meals. You don't make them come to you. You go.
Yeah, no, we go to them because they can't go, so they can call and say how many they want and have those meals with family that are with them.
And if you have more questions about that later, her name is Carrie. She looks like that. There you go. Right here, David.
Our church runs a thrift store and it has a food pantry.
Yeah. Thrift store and food pantry. Great. Do you know about how many people you serve on a weekly basis?
I don't, but it's in the hundreds.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not 10, right? There you go. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, our church works with the elementary school across the street with their after-school program.
Okay.
Teaching, we call it the Good News Club, teaching Bible with the kids.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Good News Clubs today because that's a big opportunity that we have those of us who live in the States and elsewhere. Linda.
In our area, in our pastors' associations, about 63 churches that we get together about 4 times a year, and we do like this. Well, right after this conference, we do a big backpack thing for all the schools in the area, and so they spend a day doing school projects, clean up, and then the next day we give away backpacks.
And is that just your church, or do you partner with other churches?
We partner with 63 other churches.
63 churches partner together to serve the schools and getting them ready to come back to school.
Yeah.
That's really neat. That's really neat. Last one in the back, yes.
Our two congregations at Christmas time do shoeboxes,
Yeah.
you know, kind of like the Franklin Graham thing that they do. And we just distribute them to the communities and take them to like places like, churches, basically, other churches, and have them distributed through that.
So around Christmas time,
Uh-huh.
shoe boxes, we put gifts in them and then distribute them. In partnership with other churches, is that what I heard?
Yes,
That's really
yes.
neat. I like it a lot. Oh, yes, last
Just an
one.
example.
En Navidad hacemos banquetes para toda la comunidad, invitando por cuadras. En el Día del Amigo, el Día de las Madres y a los jóvenes también les hacemos, lo llamamos banquetes.
She says they prepare a banquet. She's in Colombia. And she says they prepare a banquet in the community. And they invite during Christmas, during Easter, during the Mother's Day and Father's Day and so on. And they are the youth as well, they're people. And they have community dinners. And they invite them to come and share it.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
It's free for them too.
And it's free, so they can come for a free
They
meal.
come, yeah.
And for those of us who have facilities and church buildings, that's a really neat way to serve people. I imagine some of us in this room maybe rent facilities or have shared facilities, that'd be a little harder. But that's great, I like it. I think it's important when we talk through community partnerships, there's going to be a lot of things you could walk away from here and say, our church needs to do this. It's important, though, that you always keep in mind, what is the mission of your church? What is the heartbeat of your church? What is the thing that your church is best at? Because you could walk away from here and just do a lot of good. And that's neat. And especially if it's gospel-centered, like that's great. But does it fit with the mission of your church? Does it fit with who you've been historically? I know as a church, for us, in my context, our mission statement, what we are as a church, we really believe that we're there to reach out to people who don't yet know Jesus and bring them into a relationship with Jesus. That is what we are about. And so I know, because I'm not in senior leadership at my church, I'm on a team, but I'm not the big guns. If I'm going to come with a proposal, hey, here's a great thing for us to do, I better be tying it into the mission of the church. And it's good for you to know, if you could right now, write down the mission of your church, that's helpful. Because it helps you as you go home and reframe whatever idea you have, that you can pitch it well to your senior leadership. Now, is there anyone in the room today who is the pastor of their church? Yeah, great. So you already get it. You are that person. Your job is actually then going to be to communicate out of the congregation, right? And we're going to get there in a minute. But if you're not at that level of leadership in your church, it's helpful to know what your mission is today and what it has been historically, what your church has been known for historically, so that as you reach out, that can be something that you tie in to your pitch. Does that make sense? If you just say, hey, I have a great idea, well, that's nice. But if it's, hey, here's how our church could better accomplish our mission, that pitch is better, it's easier to get senior leadership involved. It's helpful to know what excites your pastor. What are those things that he talks about a lot or she talks about a lot? What are those things that help bring them to faith? What are those things that their family's been involved with historically? Just because it gives you a sense of, is this going to be something they get excited about, or is this something I'm going to have to fight through? And so knowing the mission is just important when we talk through those things. I would also like you to consider that your church is a church for your neighbors. I didn't start in the book of Matthew on accident today. Jesus says the most important thing we can do is love God with everything we have. And nobody asks him, and what's the second most important? He goes there, right? He goes, and in case you were wondering, the second most important thing you can do is to love your neighbor. And I think that God has put our churches in our communities on purpose. Yeah, Mark.
Good book out called The Art of Neighboring. It's written by two guys in my local church association in Nevada.
Yep.
Jay Pathick and Dave Runyon. And they start with the concept of what if Jesus meant our actual neighbors?
What if Jesus meant
our actual neighbors?
Our actual neighbors. Yeah. No, what if Jesus actually meant our actual neighbors, the people who live next door to us? Absolutely. Something I challenge our congregation to do is to go into Google Maps, make their own map, and start pinning the names of their neighbors, and just see how many they can do. And so I would encourage you, can you name your neighbors?
There's some graphics on that same website that will let you do the same thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to ask of a congregation because they might realize they don't actually know the people who live on their street. And I think we as church leaders need to figure that piece out before we then tell our congregation that we need to serve our community. We need to be good neighbors first. And that's us in this room, and it's also, I would say, neighbors to those who are within vicinity of your church. Wherever you gather as a body, do your neighbors like you? Would they say that you serve them well? Your church should be a church for your neighbors. Jesus doesn't call us just to be a church for ourselves, and a gospel-centered church, a gospel-centered ministry can never be just about us. An us-centered ministry absolutely can be. But gospel-centered means that we're actually called to serve our neighbors well. And so I'd ask you, do you know your neighbors? I'd also ask, do you know the other neighboring churches in your community? Could you tell me who the other pastors are who serve your community? For some of us, that's hard, because not every pastor at other churches want to get to know us. Because they're really interested in the castle they're building and not the kingdom we're a part of. And so here's a way to get to know pastors in your community. Ask the members of your church, the friends you have in your church, who they know who are Christians who go elsewhere. So just start there. What other churches do your friends go to? From there, that then narrows down your list of who you might want to reach out to contact. It's helpful to partner where there are already somewhat existing relationships. Even if that relationship is between bodies and maybe not heads, that's okay because there's a connection there. And then, a tip that I would give you is use Facebook. Here's what I mean. So let's say you go to your friend Joan, you say, Joan, do you know anybody else who goes to other churches in town? And Joan goes, actually, yeah, there's this Grace Church across town. I have a couple friends who go there. Oh, that's great. You then hop on Grace's website, find out the name of their pastor, see if they're on Facebook. See if they're there. And if they are, send them a message. Say, hey, we have some mutual friends. I would love to get coffee with you sometime. That comes across very different than an email that says, I'm another pastor in town. If you name, here's a connection, there's some accountability there, that there are friendships involved, and it kind of stirs people to engage. The other nice thing about Facebook, and why I say Facebook, is you can tell when a message has been read. It says message seen. It just helps, again, with accountability, that another pastor in town, even if they're busy, once they view that message, you then know they viewed it. An email can just disappear into the ether of everything. And you never know if it got read, and there's that question there. You at least know with a Facebook message. Some of you might be wary about engaging in social media, and if that's the case, I like telling this little story. Imagine there was a park in your town where there's, slides and playgrounds and coffee, and the people of your church and the people of your neighborhoods went there all day long. Anytime they had a break from work, they ran to that park to hang out with each other. And sometimes they show up there to say, hey, this part of my day's been stressful. Or maybe they go there to say, hey, I heard this really funny joke. Or to say, hey, have you seen this picture? But they're going to that park throughout the entire day. And as soon as they get off work, the first place they go is to that park to hang out. If there was such a place as that, your church leadership would probably target that as a place you should also hang out. And I will tell you that Facebook, for 30s and 40s and 50s in your congregation, that is their park. That is where they probably hang out. And if not in your congregation, in your neighborhood. That is where people are. And it's important to think through, are you hanging out where people are hanging out? Teens and 20s are looking at Facebook and going, that's where our parents are. So they're finding other places. And so if you're really trying to engage kind of young adults, go to a different breakout. But if you want to engage 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s, that's where they're at. That's where they're hanging out. And what you can do is watch that space, hang out in that park, and see what are the things that people care about. What are the things they're concerned about? And just watch, and just listen. And I'd say, and just be a person. Don't use that to say, hey, church event, hey, church event, hey, church event. Be a person. Also, don't go there and say, hey, political view, hey, political view. That's not helpful. That's not gospel-centered. As as much as I love being a citizen and engaging in those things, going to the park and saying, here's what I think, is not always the best place to do that. So, think about those things in getting to know your neighbors. And I'd encourage you, try to leverage social media to connect with those other pastors. Because they might be already involved in a community partnership that you can jump in on. And you don't have to recreate the wheel. And now, the body is actually working together and not fragmented. And that can be a really neat thing. Your church is actually called to be a church to your neighbors, both living near you and also the body close to you. I'm going to suggest a couple entry points for partnerships in your community. If your church is already doing these things, fantastic. If you already have it figured out, great. But I do want to suggest a couple different entry points. And again, it starts with who are your neighbors. If you live in the United States, you've never been to citydata.com, so city and then there's a hyphen, data.com, I would encourage you to go there. And here's why. It's going to tell you the demographics of the people you live near. And you can actually narrow it down by neighborhood and by district. And you can figure out median income and how many people live in houses and what are the things that they're concerned most about. Citydata.com, and if that's hard for you to see, CITY -data.com. Citydata.com just gives you a sense of who your neighbors are. It's just a great place to start. You start looking at how educated are they, what are they making, how far do they commute. That'll give you a sense of how much free time do they have to actually engage with their neighbors. But that's a good place to start. And I would start asking people you know, what are your neighbors concerned about? In our community, people are really concerned with the housing market because we live in California and they bought their houses at a really expensive price and then it crashed. And now as it comes back up, they're all watching to see what's it going to do. They're concerned about that. They're really concerned about finances. In our community, people are also really concerned with education of their kids. That's a big thing in our community. And they also, in our community, like the idea of neighborhoods. Like of people actually knowing each other. Now they aren't good at it, but they like the idea of it. And we've come to know that because we ask a lot of questions. And we get to know our neighbors, and we ask them what are the things they're involved in. And so anytime you're going to partner with your community, it's helpful if you're meeting a felt need, not an observed need. Because if you go to someone and you say, here's what would be a really good idea, if they don't think it's a good idea, you're answering a question they're not asking. And so it's helpful to actually get to explore your community a little bit and get to know who they are. Citydata.com is free. There is another service that you could look into if you really wanted to. There's a group called the Precept Group that will actually do what's called a first look at your community. And they'll send out surveys and they'll actually ask those questions. What is your city? What do your neighbors really care most about? How religiously affiliated are they? Have they had any church experience? Those are just good questions to ask. Yes. The name of the group, and I was just looking at my notes because I did not want to mess this one up. It's the Precept Group. And I can, when we're done here, if you want to hang out, I'll pull up on the screen a report we had run for our church, just so you can kind of see what that looks like. We were fortunate enough that a local Christian university used us as a test site, and here another report for us. So that was nice. That comes through community partnerships. We partner well for universities. But the first question you should be asking is who are your neighbors. Now, if you live in a city, chances are you have a Parks and Recreation department in your city. Just so you know, they're already running events that the community shows up to. They are. They run events that the community shows up to, and they need volunteers. I don't know if you do that. But if you live in a city, in the United States, they probably have a Parks and Rec department. I grew up in a town of 4,000 people. We had a Parks and Rec department. They put on events. I now live in a city of 60,000 people. We have a Parks and Rec department. They put on events. Something that we did a few years ago as a church is we hopped on the website just to see who was kind of in charge of planning those events. And from there, We then made a phone call to that person. We didn't send an email to info@Parks and Rec. We actually made a phone call. And we asked them, hey, what's the next big event you have coming up that you need volunteers for? For them, they put on a big Halloween party where they do different carnival type things. And so we asked, how many volunteers do you need? Could we give you 5? And from there, that built a relationship with them. So later on, they actually run a big community Easter egg hunt on the Saturday before Easter every year. And so we decided as a church, we weren't going to run our own Easter egg hunt. We were going to go to the city's Easter egg hunt, where people who don't know Jesus hang out, and we were going to volunteer there. The city asked us if we would make pancakes for people. So now, we make pancakes for the people who show up to an Easter egg hunt. We wear shirts that say what church we're from, and we've started inviting other churches into that to show people who don't yet know Jesus that the church can work together, that the church is there to serve, that we're there to care for others. While we're there, we offer a prayer ministry. I've found in our context where we do life in ministry, people actually have things they want to be prayed for, even if they don't know Jesus yet. That's not an intimidating thing. And I believe that that is gospel. That offering prayers for people is a way to bring gospel to them. We don't do it in a creepy way. We don't chase them down and say, I'm going to pray for you, and put hands on them and knock them over. We don't do that. You can try. We don't. But we do offer that as a resource for people when we're out in the community. We also, like I said, wear t-shirts that have our church's name on them, and we try to have flyers out about our next something that we're doing as a church to point people towards. As a church, we try to funnel our events, and so we do kind of large things and then break down to smaller things and always point back towards our worship services. Yes, John?
Do you find that in working with parks, recreation, city type things, is there a conflict of interest if you as a church, do they get upset if you're wearing your church t-shirt or have literature available?
Yeah, so John's question is, if you show up with literature and t-shirts, is the city going to be upset? If you do it the first time, probably. Again, what we did is we just asked what do you need help with. And that Halloween event, we just went and served. And we intentionally went to serve, looking for Parks and Rec staff that we could build a relationship with. Because it's much easier to then make asks later when they know that you're not crazy. Right? It's just helpful. So when Parks and Rec sees that you're a person and the members of your church are regular people, they're much more willing later on down the road if you ask them, hey, we have this really big VBS coming up that we would love to offer to kids. Can we have flyers out for that? They'll know, okay, this isn't some kind of weird group. This is John. We like John. Sure, we trust him. Now, if then when you're wearing your church t-shirts, you do something ridiculous, you probably are going to ruin that relationship. But you earn your way into that, I would suggest. Parks and Rec is a great window because, again, they're already probably running events in your community that you can come alongside. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You can then build relationships with people who work in your city. The other suggestion I would have, and it was already brought up a little earlier, is in your local public schools. If you live in the United States, you are able to partner with an organization called Child Evangelism Fellowship to run after-school programs that are Bible-based in public schools. Now, sometimes when I say that, people go, but no, I thought they got rid of the Bible and prayer in public schools. They did. And then in 2001, we were actually able to bring them back. Child Evangelism Fellowship really believes that children need to hear the gospel. They really believe that. They think that kids often can't drive themselves to church, and that is correct. And so they started looking at, so where are children? Well, they're in neighborhoods, and they're in schools. And so Child Evangelism Fellowship started running what they call backyard clubs, where after school, when school gets out, a home near a school would host a backyard club. And it was a place for kids to come and hang out and hear about Jesus and hear about God's love for them. Well then, in 2001, there was a court case that allowed clubs to meet in public schools after school hours. Now, a lot of people read that as, so that's Boy Scouts. And absolutely, it's Boy Scouts. But Child Evangelism Fellowship also saw that there was now a way to get Bible clubs into school after school. And so we can. You can offer a completely free program that's after school in your local public schools to share the gospel with kids. When I found that one out, I was living up in Northern California at the time, and I found it out because we had a sweet old lady in our church who ran a Bible study after school in public school, and I asked her, I said, Susan, how do you do this? She said, well, it's Child Evangelism Fellowship, and it's this good news club. This is amazing. And so when I then transplanted down to Los Angeles, I looked at our school district and I went, how neat would it be if we started those down here? And what if we were intentional about it? And what if we involved other churches? And what if we actually made this something that was not about our church, not about me, but was actually about other churches? And so we started Good News Clubs. If you go to cefonline.com, there's more information about Good News Clubs there. If you live outside of the United States, Canada, for example, do you have any Canadians in the house? Anybody? Oh, look at that. Well, if you're in Canada, you can still run backyard clubs, and in a lot of other countries, CEF will absolutely equip you and give you the curriculum to run backyard clubs. Those are still a great way to reach kids in their neighborhoods. But here in the States, we can actually get on the public school campuses. As a church, we believe that these clubs should be parent-driven and church-supported. And I would say the same thing with any kind of community partnership. My hope would be that they'd be driven by the people who are passionate about them. So Parks and Rec, when we partner with them, it really is a Parks and Rec program that the church supports and comes alongside. What that does is it helps disarm people who might be worried that the church is on conquest. Because really the church is there to support and encourage and be gospel. The church is not there just to take over and make it their own. As a church, capital C church, we're not always great at that. We're prone to conquest, and then when we do it, that doesn't usually go well. But we're really good at coming alongside people. And so I would encourage you, if you look at starting Good News Clubs, think about what it would look like for them to be parent-driven, church-supported. For us to start Good News Clubs, I started attending PTA meetings. So Parent-Teacher Association is actually open to anyone in the community. You do not need to be a parent of a child in a school to be a part of their PTA. They actually want people in the community to care about their school, and they will welcome your voice there. I also started attending school board meetings. Again, I could do that. I'm a voice in the community, and I could just show up. And in those meetings, at PTA gatherings and at school board meetings, I started asking, hey, who do you know who's a really connected mom who loves Jesus? I just started asking that question. And I found out that there was a mom at one of the schools who I actually knew fairly well. She went to our church. And people kept naming her. Leanne. Oh, Leanne's great with that. Leanne. And so I went to Leanne. I said, Leanne, I want you to pray over something. What would it look like for us to start a Bible study after school? And what would it look like for you to be kind of the driving force behind it? Because I explained to her, at the end of the day, if a parent had a question about this club, I want people to say, oh, let a bunch of moms run that. Versus, oh, you know that big church down the street, they run that. It just helps disarm people from worrying that the church is about conquest. And so, we started with that one mom. That one mom started asking her friends who also knew Jesus, would you be willing to help? We started with one school, and now we've actually established clubs in 4 out of the 5 public elementary schools in our area. We have, at our highest points, over 600 children attending those clubs weekly. And we started with volunteers from 10 different churches. We're now at a place where we have over 30 churches involved in running these clubs. And here's the thing, it doesn't take a lot of work. Here's what I love about CEF. They already have a curriculum. They already have background checks in place that you can run on your leaders. They already have name tags that they will give you. Child Evangelism Fellowship believes so much in Good News Clubs, they will absolutely come alongside you and make it work. In public schools, we get to teach kids about Jesus. Now, first steps and next steps. If that's something that you hear and you go, I kind of want to know more about that, go going to the website, CEF Online, is a great place to start. You probably have an area representative over your area. They're already assigned to you. You just didn't know about it. And so on the website, it'll tell you who to contact. When you contact them, they'll walk you through all the steps it would take to start a club. For us, we saw those clubs as an opportunity to work with other churches and start building relationships there so that we could do bigger things in the community with them. So if I go to church and I say, hey, other pastor, I really want to do Thanksgiving meals at my church. Will you send volunteers to me? They're going to go, but it's at your church. And it sounds like it's very much about you. And you can explain, our facilities are set up for it, our pastor's excited about it, we just need more volunteers, will you send them to us? If there's not already an existing relationship and trust built up there, that's a harder ask. If it's a church that you're now already partnering with on a public school campus to bring the gospel to families, and you say, hey, from this club, we want to point people toward this meal. Can we have some of the same team members who serve with kids there serve at our church? Or can your church host it because we don't have a building, or our building isn't big enough for this? There's then working relationship at a neutral site that you can then leverage into further community partnerships. I have found that being involved on the public school campus and doing that well there has done an amazing thing for the kingdom in our community. The churches that had never partnered before because they were Baptist and Presbyterian, who see the world very differently, realized that they love the same Jesus. They just worship in different buildings in a different context. And they started working together to do things like food pantries, to do things like clothing distribution centers, to do things like meals around holidays. And for us, that neutral ground was the public school. Because all of us in church leadership could probably go to our congregation and say, hey, we could teach kids in the public school about the Bible and we could pray with them. Is that something you'd be excited about? And most people would not. If you posted that on Facebook, lots of people would like it. That is anything. And not everyone knows that that's something that we can do. We can actually go on the public school campuses and teach kids about Jesus with a Bible in our hand. We do not have to be speaking of it. What's neat about Good News Clubs is a permission slip goes home to every kid in the school in their backpack. And then those families can sign their kid up for that club or not. And it's completely free. What happens is a lot of families who would never show up at your church on a Sunday will sign their kids up for it. Because it's a free after school something and they no longer have to pay for a babysitter that day or for daycare that day. Often Good News Clubs work in partnership with the school's daycare program so that kids who are typically in daycare will then check in straight to daycare from club when it lets out. Schools are actually willing to run Good News Clubs because principals find that kids who are involved in Good News Club start treating their other classmates differently. Go figure. That schools actually appreciate it when leaders of a Good News Club start putting a little can for prayer requests in the teacher's lounge. We have found that teachers are so willing to ask for prayer because they have hard jobs. And they know they have hard jobs. And knowing that someone is praying for them makes a difference, even if that teacher does not know Jesus. They'll still fill out prayer requests and put them in. Yes?
There are many other levels. We had a meeting about that in our Pastors Association recently. There are a lot of different ways to partner with schools.
Absolutely. And they're
name that schools need it, but again, it's going to be a felt need, not we're going to come in and give
Yes.
you away.
And for us, we started to notice some of those felt needs once we were involved on campus. We found out that one of the schools was going to lose its PE program entirely. And so we said, hey, we have some dads who can flex their schedules. Can we actually bring in some local coaches from the community to help run PE for your fifth graders? And the school went, we need that. Sure, absolutely. During summer school, something we've done in the past is we've provided yard duty assistants to help during recess during summer school because schools are just short-staffed in our area. In California, we're not doing well financially. There's cuts across the board. Your state might be similar. And so asking your public school where they need help is a great window in, door in. And then it's really neat to ask other churches to do it with you. public schools become that neutral site where you can build relationships that you can later launch into bigger partnerships. That Parks and Rec are just two examples of ways that you can partner with organizations that are already doing something. Yes, Bernie.
Yeah, just in support with what Mark said. We just started our Good News Club last year, and we asked them what else can we do, and they said there's this one wall in the area it's full of poison ivy and all this. Nobody wants to clean it, so our people volunteered and they cleaned it up. Well, so we had a relationship, and through the Good News Club we were able to scholarship 9 of them to our summer camp. This is for our first year, but they kind of trusted us already, so they went to the summer camp. So it was pretty good.
So you missed what Bernie just said. They found out from the school that there was an area of the school that needed to be cleaned and needed to be taken care of. And so they offered to do it, further building that relationship they have with the school. The school now looks at the Good News Club as a resource to them and a group of people who care about them. And then some of those kids involved in the club, they're actually able to scholarship and bring to summer camp with them because they already had built trust and relationship with those families. That's really neat. I like it. Now, anytime that you do something in the community, you're going to need volunteers. And as a church, you will never have enough volunteers. There's always more things to be done that you have people to do. And I encourage people, when they're thinking through new ministry opportunities, new community partnerships, to go through 4 Ds of volunteering. Number 1, as a leadership team, to dream about every single role a volunteer could fill. And just write them all down and get as nitpicky as possible. Anytime you're recruiting volunteers for any piece of ministry, this is a helpful thing to do. To dream about, if I could have a volunteer fill every role I need them to fill, what would they be? From there, define those roles. I think it's helpful when you recruit somebody to become a volunteer in your ministry if you actually have a role description for them. If there's actually almost like a job description that they sign at the end of it. If it's volunteering in Good News Club, it's, I will show up on Thursdays 15 minutes early. I will pray for my kids during the week. I will make sure children do not sit on my lap. Any kind of rules that you might have, I'll make sure I don't do overtly political angry posts on Facebook. Whatever it is you want to work into that role description, you laugh. We've written that in because people don't always think through how they use social media, and this gives them a chance to go, oh, that matters. But define what their role is, come up with a role description. It adds a level of accountability for a volunteer. It lets them know that this job matters enough that somebody actually wrote down what the role is. And it actually comes in importantly in a moment. And I would encourage you, anytime that you're launching a new program, a new initiative, a new partnership, delegate as much as you can. As the leader in your church, it's easy for you just to take everything on because it's easier for you to do it, and you're better at it. And I don't doubt that. But if you're better at it, and you just do it, no one else will ever become better at it. And you are then getting in the way of the Spirit equipping the saints to do the ministry of the church. And so early on, delegate as much as you can. If you fail to do that step, people will see you as the person who does it all. They'll feel like they can never do it as well as you, and they won't even try. And so if you're launching something brand new, that's a great chance to say, oh, and these are roles I don't do. These are things you're going to do. And delegate them. And early on, teach your volunteers to duplicate themselves. And this is why it's important then in a role description to say, and I will coach someone else to do my role. If it's built into the process early on, for you to dream about every single position that could exist. If it's built into the process for you to define what those roles are, it's built into the process that you delegate responsibilities, and then that your volunteers duplicate themselves, that's what's allowed us to launch 4 clubs after school in our public school system. I can't be all those places at once. And if early on I would have just taken on, I'm going to run a club, we'd be running one, because there's only one of me. But we're now able to do that, and I'm able to step back. We actually have other churches that have taken leadership roles in all those clubs at this point, because I have another initiative I'm working on where we're trying to rally dads at our public schools to actually do service projects and actually involve dads in the public school system, which is a felt need by the teachers, and they're rallying with us to say that's what you need to do.
Ed Spencer says that when the leader or pastor does for the people what the people should be doing, the gospel is hindered and everybody gets hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Being gospel-centered is being like Jesus. And Jesus sent the disciples off in pairs, right? He didn't go and just do everything himself. He equipped them and empowered them and sent them. And so if we're going to be people who do ministry like Jesus, we need to do the same. And equipping the saints to do the ministry of the church. Now, communication comes in because you just sat in, an hour-long seminar, and you get it, and that's great, and you're going to be excited about it, unless you aren't excited. And the questions you wrote down at the beginning, I didn't answer. I'm going to answer those in a minute. But there's a trick that then comes in communicating this passion you have about community partnerships to your congregation. And so there's 4 different ways I think that we can help communicate our vision to our churches. I think we cast vision as leaders with the words that we say. And so I would encourage you to start using the word partner and neighbor a lot. Because on their own, your congregation might not actually care about their neighbors. And you can pray about it, and Jesus can work in their lives, and they might not be able to all come up with that word. But if you use it a lot, and you become the person who talks about being friends with your neighbors, with the words that you say, if you're somebody who speaks in front of your congregation, that's something that's worth thinking about. Are the words I'm saying communicating the idea that partnership should exist, that the gospel should be taken to others, and that we should care about our neighbors? It's also in the words that you print when you send out newsletters. If your newsletters or emails that you send out to your congregation, if in your bulletin, if everything is only about your congregation and not about your neighbors and not about others, you're inadvertently teaching your congregation that it's just about them. If your bulletin is only for the people who show up regularly, and you aren't thinking about that visitor who might be showing up, then that bulletin will always be for the people who show up regularly, because they're the ones who are going to feel comfortable. But if you're intentional about the words that you print, being words that are open, and being about partnership, if you are sending out emails, and we're going to get to celebrate in a second, that celebrate partnerships and success outside of your church building, that's going to let people know that those are things of value. I think it would be neat if your church actually had pictures of what your community partnerships look like. Now, if you're already doing community partnerships, that's great. Could every person in your church name them? And if they can name them, could they tell you what it looks like? If you have a food pantry, that's great for the 30 people who volunteer there. But what about the other 20 who don't? Have they ever seen what it looks like? Because there's a chance that the one hurdle from them serving that area is because it's unknown and a little bit worrisome. I remember a time when I was surfing, because I live in Southern California, and so you try surfing at least once, that's kind of what you do. And I picked it up for a little bit and was surfing through summer. And one of my favorite things about surfing was just sitting on my board, out in the ocean, feeling the waves. And I remember I was out with my buddy Ben, and the set came in, and he was in a better position, so he took it, and then it was just me and the ocean, and we were hanging out. And I was just kind of in this neat moment where I was like, God, this is neat. This ocean you created is still here. This is the same water. That's really cool. And then, in that really cool water, a fin came up, with a shadow. And I stopped thinking about how cool it was, and I started thinking about how much I was about to miss my ankle, or my kidney, or all those different things. And I will tell you, friends, I was worried. I wet myself. Like, it was not a pretty sight. And then in that moment of being terrified, another thing came up, and another one, and it was dolphins, and that was sweet. I know. I didn't think that. I swam in. I got the heck out of there, because I realized in that moment that the ocean is deep, and the ocean is scary, and I don't like the unknown. And the people in your congregation are afraid of the unknown. And if you don't show them what community partnerships look like, they'll always be less willing to dive into them. Because people are afraid of the things that they don't know and the things that are unseen. I've had 3 kids now, not me, my wife. She would punch me if I said it was me. She went through a lot of work for those 3 kids. I was alongside her in the process, and early on, they do a hospital visit with new parents who haven't had their babies yet, so that during the experience, there's not a lot of unknowns. And again, you have a chance to show your congregation through pictures and video what your community partnerships look like, or what they can look like. And words sometimes don't quite do that justice. And again, the things that you celebrate as a church are going to be the things that your congregation celebrates as a church leader. We began a couple years ago, we stole an idea from someone else. You can steal it from us if you'd like. We started putting a candle at the front of our church, up next to where our pastor preaches, where there's a cross, right? All those things that matter on the stage, that communicate those things that are most important. We now have a candle. That candle gets lit when we hear a story from our congregation of someone coming to know Jesus for the very first time. We light that candle. And it put out front of the congregation this symbol of this thing that we say is a value. And we celebrate the heck out of that candle getting lit. It doesn't happen every weekend. And on weekends when it doesn't, our congregation has to look at a candle that is not lit that weekend. And sometimes it's weekends in a row where that candle isn't lit. But when it is, it reminds our congregation that's what matters. Someone came to know Jesus. And then we can say, and that happened through our good news clubs, or that happened through our food pantry and our counseling center, or that happened as Barry hung out with his neighbor who had all kinds of questions about faith. And Barry was actually equipped to lead him there. That was really neat, and we celebrate that. If you celebrate community partnerships in your congregation, people will start to get excited about it. Hey, this week we gave this many meals away. Hey, at our clubs, we're partnering with this many churches. And all of a sudden people go, I guess partnering with churches is something we should be so. Okay, that's a good thing, great. Because as a leader in the church, you celebrated it. My kids were not born knowing that birthdays are exciting. We taught them birthdays were exciting because we had cake, we had candles, and there are presents. And now they can't wait for their birthday. It's the coolest thing in the world. They weren't born thinking about that. There are other parts of the world where it's not as big of a deal. But in our home, birthdays are a big deal. In our home, my wife and I, our anniversary is an even bigger deal. And we make sure we celebrate it more important than birthdays. Because it's great that, like, you didn't die for a whole year. Neat. It's really great that mom and dad stayed together for one more year. And that is worth celebrating because that takes a lot of work. And so we celebrate those things well. And we have a chance to teach, in my house, my kids, we have a chance in our congregations to teach them those things that we're celebrating. I'd encourage you to walk away from here to do one thing. Not 30 things. Not 17 things. Do one. And from there, build from there. It's easy to go home with 13 ideas and say, here's all the things we got to do, team. And they're going to get overwhelmed. Be excited about one new initiative that you can launch, one new partnership that you can try. Don't try to take it all on at once. And from that one, with success there, you can build into others. But I'd encourage you to think about what is that one thing you might be able to do, partner with places in your community to bring the gospel to others. And because we started on time, and I like you guys a lot, we actually have a chance now, those questions you wrote down at the beginning, that I in no way answered because this didn't go where you thought it was going to go. We can now talk through that as a group, if you would like. If there's something that I brought up that you have a question about, or something that we just didn't address that you wish we would have, now's a good time to bring that up. And this will now go as long as you need to go. Yes?
Right at the beginning, you said you were a family pastor.
Yes.
What is that?
Oh, so I'm at a bigger church where we have multiple people on staff. I've not always been at a bigger church with multiple people, but I am right now. Which means that I provide oversight for programs that happen for children cradle to college. And so we have a strategic plan for what a kid will learn through our programs during that time frame. And then also I pastor their parents and their family units through that course of time. And so we have marriage and parenting ministries that I oversee and coach teams for. I don't do everything, They would wear me out, even though I'm young, have lots of energy, that's great. I want to be in this for a while. And so I lead a team who does a lot of ministry, but that's what I oversee is cradle to college, parenting family ministry. And that's kind of what that looks like. Yeah. I've grown into that role. I was not hired to do that. I was 23 when they hired me. I had no reason to speak into marriages. I've been married for like a year at that point. I still sometimes wonder why I do what I do and why I'm invited to hang out with you. You're much smarter than I am. I promise you that. What else? What other questions did you have along the way? Sharon.
Just wondering, the backyard clubs.
Yes.
Is there any type of legal liability that needs to cover? Would that be covered by your church or?
So what's neat about Child Evangelism Fellowship, CEF as an organization, is their insurance covers everything. So with Good News Clubs, your church isn't on the line for anything because it's not your church running it, it's your church supporting it, but it's the umbrella of CEF that covers that. And so the same thing goes with backyard clubs in the States and abroad. CEF's insurance covers all of that. And they're the ones who have the background checks and they will pay for those to get run. Like they take care of all that because they believe so deeply in bringing forth the gospel, they're willing to take care of those pieces. Yes? Back here.
I just have a comment I'd like to make. I didn't know about public schools being able to have those meetings for little children. 63 years ago, I was one of those little children that got to go to one of those classes. And my parents didn't have a car, so we didn't have a church to go to. But my first grade teacher made sure that I was, my mother knew about these classes. And for about 3 years, I attended every Tuesday afternoon. And it was such a wonderful opportunity, those little old ladies with their flannel board. And I learned so much. I learned to quote scripture. I learned so many things that I wouldn't have had the opportunity otherwise. So get out there and do it.
Seriously, friends, I couldn't say it better. Let's go here.
What specific programming do you have for your high school kids at your church?
Oh, for our high schoolers, and I talked a little bit more about this. There's a breakout that I'm doing about getting teens involved in leadership and serving. We on Wednesday nights run programs, cradle to college, from 6:30 to 8 o'clock, and that's kind of our Wednesday night youth group time. On Sunday mornings, we expect high schoolers to worship with their families, because actually being involved in multi-generational worship is the best thing we can do to prepare high schoolers for their college years and being able to find a church. And so we have them there. And we also encourage them to serve somewhere on campus on Sunday. We try not to offer high school specific Sunday school. Though if we have adult Sunday school classes, high schoolers are absolutely invited to hang out with grown-ups. Because one day they're going to graduate from our church and go somewhere, and I want them to know how to find a church. And if we've only ever given them youth group, they're going to have no idea how to find a church. And so we try to get them involved in service and also worshiping with the congregation, which sometimes means leading in prayers in the congregation. Sometimes it means helping lead with music. Sometimes it's being a greeter or an usher. There's lots of different ways we can find service places for them, but that's what high school ministry looks like for us. And then throughout the year, we'll do big events to try to gather people together and then funnel them down. Jimmy?
Before I came here, we've got a bunch of young singles that grew up in church. They love the church, got involved in a lot of wrong things. Now they want to come back and meet with me, and I just have a night with them for that schedule right now. What do you suggest for young singles?
What do I suggest for young singles? I think that for young adults, and young singles included, getting involved in being the hands and feet of Jesus and serving in the community is going to change their life more than a Bible study. As long as they're then also worshiping with the community on weekends. I really think that there's this passion that's built into the millennial generation for helping others that as church leaders we can absolutely leverage. all of their peers, whether they go to church or not, love Jesus or not, their peers care deeply about service. Now sometimes that means they're going to buy shoes that help other people get shoes, but they still consider that a way to help others. And so if you're able to leverage that and get them involved somewhere serving in the community, at a food pantry, or doing a renovation project in a public school, or something that they can get their hands dirty with, that's going to make the gospel come to life more to them than just another Bible story, probably, would be my thought. Give them something to rally around and something to do together. And then point back to that weekend worship service. Get them involved with people who are older than them and younger than them. And it helps them see the world a little bit bigger than just themselves. What do you thought? What would you say?
I would just say, with that meeting you have with them, is just listen without expectation of all that they could do, and hear what they are passionate about and what they want to do, because they might already have ideas of what they want to partner with you.
And Mark, what would you add?
Ministry begins with listening.
Yeah, amen. Ministry begins with listening. Yes. Thank you. That's good.
I've been learning that one hard way.
We're at about an hour. I'll be here at the front of the room for a while. I think we do have other breakouts to get to. This is kind of my room throughout the conference, and so if ever you want to swing back by and say hi, you can have to do that. Thanks for hanging out, friends. Enjoy the rest of your day.